Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden, it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Ray Heath. Hi Ray, thank
Hello,
you for joining me
Jules.
today.
Really nice to be here.
It's so exciting to have you here. You're coming to talk to me all about the brain. Now you're a bit of a psychology geek.
Yeah, I am.
How did you get into it?
Essentially, psych's my bread and butter. So I've been teaching it for more years than I would care to think about too hard. I really love it. I'm kind of keen to give students the opportunity to harness the fun of a subject like psych because it's so relevant to them. And I guess you could say that psychology's got quite a dark past, really, in terms of its research history, because essentially it was about, what goes wrong with the human psyche. Abnormal behaviors, psychiatric issues, things like why do people commit crime, which are all really important questions to answer, of course. But ultimately, in recent years or decades at least, we've got to a stage where people are starting to use psychology to think about how we can be the best that we can be.
They're putting a more positive spin on it.
Yeah, exactly. Things like the movement positive psychology and humanistic psychology are saying, okay, most of us are fairly kind, decent people who bimble our way through lives being well behaved. How can we use the science of psychology to think about how we can be the best versions of ourselves? I wish I'd been taught that stuff when I was 14. I would have loved it. So I'm teaching kids from the age of 14 to 18 how to harness the fun of psychology as science. So I get to teach them things like the influence of emotion on memory, how we remember, how can we remember better? How do other people influence our behavior? Really, really important stuff, which essentially is about encouraging self-awareness. That's what psychology is about. So in order to have happy, healthy relationships, we need to be self-aware. And that's what I get to do for a job.
Do you find it has a positive impact on your students that you're teaching?
I hope so. They seem to enjoy it. I mean, I had a student today that I sat down with and we were talking about her EE, her extended essay that students have to do for their IB diploma. And she said, I just got so excited at the prospect of researching the subject. She said, I really love psych, I'm passionate about it. And I guess that's what drives me, really, that students love it and they want to learn about it. And they feel it's so relevant.
Yeah, they do. Great. I find a lot of students who have dealt with some sort of mental health issue at some point or struggle with their well-being or that kind of thing, they're more drawn to psychology. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, for sure.
How did you end up choosing it as a university subject?
Well, I studied social science at uni, and then I ended up working as a carer with people with learning disabilities. My sister has learning disabilities, so I've always been particularly interested in different behaviour, unusual behaviour, and being a family member in that environment. And then when I left uni, I started working in a scheme. It was like all the big institutions in England were closing down. And Margaret Thatcher was encouraging local government to take on the care of people who'd lived in massive hospitals for the majority of their lives. And these people were being given normal homes to live in normal streets. And we were watching these individuals blossom after living in a huge institution where they get their dinner from a kitchen that was half a mile down a corridor, and the food would be lukewarm by the time I got to the table. And if you drank a cup of tea, you had sugar in it because the tea went straight into the urn with loads of sugar. You had no choice. You had no privacy. And then these people were moving into their own homes and ordinary streets, and they were going to the local pubs, and they were able to buy their own clothes from Marks and Spencer's, and they had their own bedroom which they could shut the door and be private in. And this was revolutionary to me. I loved it. And I got a job teaching part-time in a further education college, and then kind of fell into just teaching psychology. It was kind of by accident, really, when I was about 25, alongside working with a lot of people who were working as carers themselves. I just think about the sort of stuff that I was teaching them at 25. Like they were care managers with years of experience, and there was me. I absolutely loved it.
You have an interest in holistic approaches to health. What does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah, essentially, I guess, if we're thinking about why humans behave as they do, we need to think about the mind and what the mind is, essentially. A lot of university courses never actually teach a theory of mind. So you can go through your whole psychology degree never having really got to grips with what that might mean if you were going to define it in a sentence.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So the sort of classic approach to psychology traditionally has been we look at a behaviour like depression, or we look at a behaviour like risk-taking or shyness, whatever it might be. And we might have argued, is it a nature cause? Can we explain it from a biological point of view? Is it meat and juice, essentially? Or is it nurture and to do with the environment and social influence and so on? We would never say that either or is correct now. We talk about an interactionist relationship.
That pretty much is both nature and nurture.
A combination of.
Mm-hmm.
And that will vary massively from person to person. Essentially, the theory that I teach is one proposed by a guy called Dan Siegel, who's really interesting. He's a neuroscientist and a medic. He's also a therapist. And he talks about the triangle of the mind. So at one point on the triangle, we have our biological influences, genes, our hormones, neurotransmission, where things are in the brain and what responsibilities they have and how they interact. And that would be one point. Another point would be cognitive influences. So how much of our behavior and our mental state is influenced by the way we regulate information coming in and out. How do we regulate the flow of our thoughts? That's really powerful in terms of helping people to think about their behavior.
How can we regulate our thoughts? Because it's very easy to ruminate and get caught up in your own mind and start to obsess over things and really let your brain get out of control. Certainly happened to me during menopause.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it did. It got much worse during menopause.
Absolutely. And you've got the insomnia to go with it, haven't you? So you're lying in bed thinking even more about it when you should be sleeping.
Yeah. So how can we regulate our thoughts?
Essentially, we can teach techniques. We can encourage people to recognize that they're having the thoughts. Ultimately, you can't fix that for people. But I think being taught that there are mechanisms that you can apply to change the way that you think about things is powerful in and of itself. Just learning about something like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a really popular and effective therapy for people who have psychiatric or diagnosed conditions. I always talk to people about recognize there's this visceral event, if you like, going on in your body. There's an emotional response here. Notice it, first of all. Be mindful of it. Start to recognize where in your body it's happening, and then start to notice the stories that you're feeding that emotion. Because quite often we'll feel things, but we won't know where they come from. We aren't able to kind of identify the cause, but we'll look around, scurry around and try and piece things together and come up with a story. And our stories feed our mental processes. They feed our nervous system, along with a whole host of other things. So whilst it's really, really difficult sometimes to stop a thought process, there are lots of things that we can do to change the record, change the story. I mean, things like the gratitude movement, super popular now, keeping a gratitude journal, thinking as positively as you can. And I know some people find that a bit glib. It's like, I've got this profoundly difficult emotional situation going on and I need to think happy thoughts. It seems a bit kind of corny in some ways, but actually the research in the field suggests that it can be a very powerful tool to use. Also thinking about where emotion is sitting in your body. I found it really useful personally to focus on the actual physiological response. And then I do a lot of yoga, I do a lot of meditation.
Yeah, see,
I find it really
yoga.
Powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was finding that I was off having all these tests on my heart and my lungs, and I thought, oh my God, I've got lung cancer, I'm having a heart attack, something's really wrong. And it turns out that it was anxiety. I had got anxiety during menopause and when I was writing the book.
Yeah.
And I really just didn't know until that was the first time I've ever experienced it. And I didn't know that it was a real physiological reaction in your body. That's quite helpful for me now when I'm helping students, because I understand that they can feel it physically. It's not just in your mind and it's not just the way your mind is responding. That's really interesting to show how the mind, body and everything and the gut are also interconnected.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to our triangle of the mind,
yes,
which we didn't finish. So
yes,
we've got the regulation of information flow, thinking about controlling thoughts. We've got the meat and the juice, the nervous system and everything that goes with that. And then the third point on the triangle is our social dynamics and our environment. I mean, we are plugged into our environment. So if you're thinking about what makes your mind at the moment is as much about me as it is about what's going on inside of you. For a blind person, a really important part of their mind is their stick that they use or their guide dog. And that's a really important bit of them being engaged with their environment that informs their self-identity. And I always look at, on my smartphone is my mobile memory these days. And if they ever ban the use of phones for teachers at school, I was thinking, how will I cope? And you wonder how much of this kind of offloading of skills or cognitive functions to devices, it serves me brilliantly because it takes a lot out of the stress. My day is cleared because I'm using that. But ultimately, you wonder what the impact of that is eventually on things like cognitive function and memory. I think that triangle is really useful to help kids understand there's an interconnected nature. There's no one single cause for any behaviour. And there's massive individual variation.
And you can work on all three areas to regulate or improve or change or fix whatever's going on.
For sure. And that's why I was particularly interested in all this new research that's going on around gut health, because it's an aspect of physiology that's really only recently begun to be investigated because of changes in genetic testing. They've now got more advanced ways of looking at what's going on inside your gut.
What are they finding? Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so if we look at holistic health, ultimately, we're talking about managing a whole range of different systems. I mean, just to emphasize, there's so much you need to know about pharmacology, neurology, immunology that is well beyond the scope of today. But if you think about something like the stress response, we're designed to react to our environments in a way that protects us. Our stress response serves us very well day in, day out. Now, that's all fine and good if you're needing to fight or flee. If that's the response that serves you, then our system's really protective. It's great. But we have an issue with chronic stress nowadays in society. We've got this scenario whereby people are physiologically responding to, let's say, some kind of acute stressor that is life-threatening. We perceive it as life-threatening. We react with this releasing lipids, releasing sugar into our system, diverting blood away from the gut to our extremities to either stay or fight. But that's not the response that we need. You could try and headbutt your boss, but you'd probably end up getting arrested. Or you could try running away very fast, which we often feel like doing, but we can't. And yet we've got all this stuff going on in our body. From an acute point of view, that system's great. From a chronic point of view, It's not good at all. And it is one of the number one killers in modern society for sure. With regard to the gut-brain axis and how they influence each other, we're discovering that this incredible ecosystem that we have in our gut, and actually it's called the microbiome, and it exists not only inside of us, but also on our bodies and lots of other places too in our environment, that is interacting in such a way as it's actually helping to contribute to things like managing the stress response. And we hadn't realized how influential that is until recently. So a lot of the research that's been done on the actual microbiome refers to animal models. And you've got to be a little bit careful if you're thinking about the crossover. What conclusions can we draw about humans from germ-free rats in the lab? A few studies have been done on humans, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But in answer to the question, what role does the gut play in psychiatry? It's a lot more than we might have thought. It's huge.
Basically, you can help have a healthier mindset by changing your diet or looking at what you're putting in your body, and they're intrinsically linked. And also, if your mind is causing you trouble, that can then cause you trouble in your stomach. And things like IBS may be linked to anxiety or mental health issues, not just related to your stomach. So it works both ways.
It works both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting,
sure.
Isn't
really
it?
Interesting. My motivation to learn more about this came from my own personal struggles with gut-related health, which was exacerbated by the menopause. And I have to say, HRT has really helped with that. I would definitely say women of a certain age, if you haven't explored bioidentical HRT, check it out. Because like you've said, I thought I was going mental. I was experiencing psychiatric symptomology. I've never been depressed or anxious in my life. I'm a really even-keeled person. Turned into this nutter during menopause. And it's profound and it's happening. A lot of that also related to gut symptoms, and HRT really helped.
Were you diagnosed with IBS during menopause, or did you have it beforehand and then it got worse?
Oh, I don't know. I've been to the doctor so many times. In terms of IBS symptoms, it's like, I think that's kind of a fob off, really. Quite often doctors will say, yeah, it's IBS.
Right.
Take this antidepressant or take this anti-anxiety, which I never did.
Oh, you didn't?
No,
but you found the HRT helped?
HRT was fantastic. Yeah, it really helped. Yeah.
Wow. Did you do a lot of research before you went on it, or did you just follow your doctor's advice?
I had a really good doctor and a couple of friends who'd researched heavily. One of my friends has Sjogren's disease. I don't think she was diagnosed then. That's an autoimmune disease, which means it's the wearing away of soft tissue. It's pretty serious. But she'd had a lot of health issues and she'd investigated HRT. So she was a great source of information. It's just this whole thing about like taking responsibility, like enough's enough. Maybe I need to start with looking at what I'm putting in my body and making some pretty major decisions about changing things.
Sorry, this is not about menopause, but I just want to know, when you went on HRT, what changed?
Mood. I had more energy. All those symptoms like skin crawling. I don't know if you had that.
Yes, I did, the rash. I had a terrible rash that came in the one spot.
Right. I used to lie in bed at night and I'd feel like I had
things crawling on your skin.
My microbiome crawling all over me. I don't know. It just felt really peculiar.
And hot
really
flushes
strange.
And stuff?
Yeah, a few of those.
Did that go away?
Yeah.
Right, wow. When do you come off HRT?
Again, that's quite a controversial topic. I've been told stay on it. There's no need to come off it. Quite a few notable professionals in the field. A woman called Dr. Annie Evans, who I think is brilliant. She's retired now, unfortunately. But I had a Skype session with her, and other friends of mine had consultations with her as well. And she says, stay on it. If it's bioidentical, it's fine. Other gynaes that I've met have said you should think about coming off it by the time you're 60. So
what's bioidentical mean?
Okay, so essentially what that means is it's made from sources that are identical to your body's chemistry. Whereas if it's not bioidentical, it's made from pregnant mare's urine.
Is it?
There's a brand called Premarin, which is actually pregnant mare's urine, and it's not bioidentical. It doesn't match our body's molecular design. Therefore, it's considered to be higher risk in terms of the development of cancer and so on.
I didn't know that.
No,
so that's
so
good
you
to
need
know.
to choose your HRT quite
Well,
carefully.
I used acupuncture and Chinese medicine for the whole time. Yes, I was constantly going for acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and it got me through. I'm pretty much finished now, just sort of dealing with a few sleep issues, but no more hot flushes, no more night sweats. And also CBD oil was brilliant as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
I've
That
heard
I
good
think
things
was the
about that.
turning point for me.
Right.
Yeah, so that was great.
I've heard it's to do with the concentration of CBD oil. You have to get that right. I don't know if you've...
I don't know.
Okay. Some people say it doesn't work unless it's got X percentage. I'm no expert.
I don't know. I just tried it and it worked. Yeah,
brilliant.
It made a massive difference. So that was really good.
How do you know? I mean, it could just be like complete placebo effect.
Well,
but
it could be, but if it works, it works. Yeah, because menopause is really hard. Oh my gosh, 10 years I went through it.
Yeah, me too.
10 years of that rubbish.
Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah, and now I'm just coming out the other end. Woo-hoo. So I feel much better. Anyway, let's go back to the brain.
Okay.
Let's talk about gut serotonin and how that affects the mood and how bad gut health can cause anxiety.
You have trillions of these bugs inside of you, and they regulate digestion, they regulate immunity, immune function, and also the nervous system. We now know that this incredible ecosystem of bugs, parasites, yeasts are all contributing to a whole range of different systems within the body. Science is learning how to manipulate those bugs to inform treatment. This is the really exciting new development. Metabolomics, I think, is the word for the science of looking at the microbiomes of different people. I think because of advanced genetic testing now, we can actually look at individual roles of different microbes within the gut, but we can also then look at how they interact with the overall system. The way that they investigate it is pretty indelicate. So if any listeners don't like to hear about the word feces, they might want to switch off by now.
Yeah, skip ahead for 10 seconds.
Yes, I might mention it again later. Okay. So sorry about that.
I'll put explicit on the rating. We'll be okay.
So basically, they're looking at the output of the healthiest people on the planet.
Who are the healthiest people on the planet?
I'll tell you about those later on.
Okay.
They've actually identified a few.
All right, great.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And then they can actually look and see what is it that's going on inside of them. And could we somehow use what we can gain in terms of knowledge to provide treatment for people with unhealthy or imbalanced microbiomes? So, we talk about endangered species generally. They're saying now that because a lot of us have a highly refined diet, we don't eat a good range of diverse foods, we're not out in the countryside very often, we're not exposed to pond water, which is what our ancestors would have been drinking, we're not eating wild foods, we're actually very limited in terms of our microbiome diversity. Also, we take lots of antibiotics, which kills the good and the bad. So they're talking about endangered species in your gut. Ultimately, if you don't have certain types of microbes, that could well be contributing to various problems that you have, not only physiological problems like osteoarthritis or cardiovascular related disease, could also relate to things like depression, anxiety, etc. There are specific bugs that are responsible for producing neurotransmitters that help us to think well, make decisions, feel good, sleep.
Gosh, I didn't know
appetite.
that.
Yeah.
Wow. How do doctors identify this?
I'm not too sure about the specifics.
Right.
The actual science has changed now it's a burgeoning science. We're at the cutting edge. There are lots of shifts happening because of the way that we can actually investigate what's going on. So I think now what they're saying is it's not just the individual microbes that we need to learn about, but how they interact. And in combination, they have all sorts of roles. It's a little bit like any kind of natural environment where animals all play a different role in contributing to the flora and fauna and the biodiversity. It's the same kind of dynamic going on inside of us.
What I wonder is how then do you change your diet or change your behaviours to fix that?
Yeah, right. Got a few suggestions.
Okay, great. Give me some of them.
Ultimately, people are saying make sure you eat as wide a variety of foods as possible, which again is kind of challenging. They talk about eating fresh organic veg, because leafy green veg, for example, will have a lot of bugs on them. And don't eat your food too clean, which again is a bit of a challenge for those of us who are eating food that's covered in pesticides, hasn't been organically farmed. But as diverse a range of foods as possible is really important. They also talk about making sure that you eat food like yogurt and kefir and kimchi and avoid things like antibiotics. Have an animal around you. Apparently, pet owners have more diverse microbiomes than non-pet owners.
Really?
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? They also say that you should drink a little bit of alcohol, which I was glad to hear, because I don't think I cope without the odd glass of red wine. My body isn't that much of a temple. Things like polyphenols are really important, so make sure you have your dark red food. They're antioxidants, so they provide a good environment for bugs to flourish.
What are some of those? Like cranberries?
Cranberries, red wine is a polyphenol.
Goji berries.
Goji berries, yeah. Marquis berry, MAQUI. That's a very good source of polyphenols. And then just sort of thinking about what you eat is really, really important. I always think like, if I feel like eating a Snickers bar, I try and hesitate at the fridge door before does my body really want this? Is this something that's going to do me any good?
And is it going to do you any harm?
Well, I don't think so. The occasional one. I actually went on a course last year. It was a virtual course, and it was called Becoming Unstoppable by Ben Angel. And he's a very interesting guy. He's written this whole kind of program. It's a book. There's a Facebook group. There's online workbooks and so on. It was really interesting. And he's somebody who suffered with depression really, really badly and had a lot of gut issues and problems himself. And he recommends all sorts of things like colonic irrigation. I won't go into my colonic irrigation exploits.
Yeah,
I did try it.
I did it for a while. Yeah. I did it for a while. I think I was trying to lose weight using it.
It's kind of bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know whether it made any difference to my life or how I felt. I don't know.
I felt lighter afterwards.
Yeah, well, you do, because most of the stuff's out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not something that I can really be bothered doing.
Yeah, and I think it was quite expensive, and I'm not too sure. He swears by it.
But anyway, what else did you learn from this guy?
He was talking about, essentially, we need to make sure that we take probiotics every day. And some of those are going to be better than others. Some are more diverse than others. Some need to be kept in the fridge. I think if you're going to get decent probiotics, you should get them from a doctor. He also talked about online gut tests. So you can actually send off
your poo,
a bit of poo in a bottle, and you can get it analysed, and they tell you, oh yes, you're deficient in this, that and the other. Here's some probiotics. But again, it costs quite a lot of money. It can cost a few $100 US. Some people feel that the detail that you get, you're better off going to a functional doctor and getting an evaluation done by somebody with a bit more professional clout. And again, you've got to look at the cost of these things. And there are 1,000,001 different supplements that he recommended. And I did look at, the whole idea of biohacking. How can you be the best physical condition you can possibly be? By spending an absolute fortune. And other people will say, just eat a wide, varied amount of food and do some exercise and do some mindfulness. And I don't think you need to spend a fortune on it all, really. I think it's quite a good idea to maybe, if you're having gut issues, go to a gut doctor and get a colonoscopy and an endoscopy and get some bloods done. That's very sensible. Food sensitivity tests, I think, are probably a good idea.
Have you done all of this?
I have, yeah. I've done.
What did you discover from all of this?
I haven't had a food sensitivity test since 2012. And I did find that I was allergic to dairy, so avoiding dairy made sense. I think yeast was an issue for me as well.
Did it help when you made these changes?
Yeah, it did. But then the issue with food sensitivity is it will change throughout the course of your life, depending on your environment, depending on your stress levels, depending on what you're eating and how you're living. Your gut is changing all the time. You need to either have the food sensitivity test done regularly or don't bother. I mean, again, you're talking about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars. So what's that? About £400 for.
Which is a lot of money, isn't it?
Test. It's hugely expensive, yeah.
Most people, if they look at the way that they eat, aren't doing as well as they could be because they're so busy or they don't have time and things like, they can't afford it for whatever reason.
For sure.
I think if you look into it, there's ways that you can eat healthily quite cheaply.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. As science is emerging, you mentioned about the mind-gut connection. What do you think is the most significant discovery?
Yeah, I would say the whole idea of psychobiotics, I think, is fantastic.
Can you explain what you mean?
So essentially, when I was talking to you earlier about we can investigate what's going on in the guts of the healthiest people, we can then look at how we could develop treatments for people with depression, with anxiety, with psychiatric disorders. The role of the microbiome is to contribute to the health of the nervous system. And this means essentially that gut microbes are involved in producing things like serotonin. We have 90% of our serotonin in our gut and about 10% of it in our brain. What that means is that there's a huge amount of nervous stuff going on in our gut. And if you think about it, there's a woman called Julia Enders who does a great TED talk on the gut-brain connection. She's a gut doctor. I don't think that's a professional title, but that'll do for now. You think about where your brain is. It's this kind of stuck on the end of your body. It's miles away from anywhere else. The gut is told by the brain to divert blood away if there's a stress response. So there's communication going on from the brain to the gut. There's a hell of a lot of communication going on from the gut to the brain. I think Aboriginal cultures talk about the gut brain being more important than the brain. And people describe this as our second brain. And it's like the chief reporter to the brain. The brain needs to know, how is the body doing? I'm stuck out here in this kind of bony, dense place on the end of the body. I need to hear, I need to be reported to. And it's the gut's job to do that, which is really interesting. So if our health isn't great, if our gut health isn't great, that's going to be communicated to our brain. And people talk about the gut being a mirror of our emotions.
I was just thinking about the saying, trust your gut.
Yeah.
You know, gut instincts. Yeah. What does that mean to you? Gut instincts.
Yeah, essentially, your gut is actually helping to produce the stuff that keeps your nervous system healthy and well. You need tryptophan to produce serotonin. And tryptophan is produced by these microbes in the gut. Things like fatty acids are also needed to produce neurotransmitters. That's what the gut does. You know, if you think about it, the gut is actually using your food to produce all the chemistry that you need to function well. So there has to be a connection emotionally.
So that's people with eating disorders or who restrict their food are putting themselves at risk of more mental health issues because the gut isn't really being able to look after the rest of the body and the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one interesting analogy that Ben made on his course, and that was to talk about, you know, you've got this beautiful red Lamborghini in a garage. If it hasn't got the right amount of petrol in it, it isn't going to perform. And we're expecting our minds to perform and our bodies to perform every day, especially in our ADD culture. Hong Kong's a very good example of that. Sleep deprived, ADD, working long hours, not sleeping enough, probably not eating that well, pollution in the atmosphere. And we don't have the right fuel and our bodies aren't being fed what they need in order to perform well cognitively. We need to be paying attention to what this is a really good place to start if you're thinking about health. Get your gut sorted out.
It is a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
And then it will have a knock-on effect to your mental and physical health.
Yeah, for sure.
Tell me about the healthiest people in the world. Who were they and what did they discover from that testing?
So there's one tribe that I've found out about called the Hadza tribe, and they're from Tanzania. A researcher called Tim Spector went out and spent time with them because he was very interested in why they're so healthy. And they have very minimal amounts of the sort of diseases that we have in the West. All the classic gastro problems, the cardiovascular issues, the diabetes, the strokes. They tend to stay very fit and healthy well into their old age. And they are hunter-gatherers. So they're living very much as we would have done many, many years ago. These people eat about 600 different types of food. So Tim Spector and this guy from the Radio 4 food program went out and spent time with them and ate like they ate for a while, a few days, I think. And they were taking, sorry, I'm going to mention that word again, poo samples, and they noticing how their own microbiomes were changing whilst they were eating roast porcupine and honey straight from the honeycomb. They realized that very quickly their microbiomes were becoming more diverse. These people are considered to be some of the healthiest in the world. And it's because of this varied diet.
Wow, so you can change your microbiome by adjusting your diet and taking the probiotics and things like that. So
people say yes. I mean, at the moment, there isn't a huge amount of research on humans, but what they tend to do is rear germ-free animals like rats in the lab. And then they'll do comparison studies of germ-free versus microbiomed up rats. And they'll
what do they find?
They found all sorts of bizarre things, actually. I think there was one study that I read about where fecal transplants were done on these rats And I've heard some of the research, I don't know how corroborated this is, but one was a fecal transplant from an obese mouse to a lean mouse.
What, you're moving the poo from one to the other?
From one to the other. It's actually, fecal transplants are actually used now as a treatment to improve people's microbiome.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea about that. That's the weirdest thing.
It is, isn't it? So essentially what they found was when they actually did fecal transplants from obese to lean germ-free rats, their behaviour changed, their eating behaviour changed. They've done the same with mood. So anxious rats, fecal transplant to calm rats. The calm rats start to display behaviour that's anxious.
Wow, no, that's really telling, isn't it?
It is really interesting. There was a book called The Psychobiotic Revolution. I can't remember the authors. It was written in 2017. And we're now talking about the brain in terms of psychiatric disorders. Very soon we're going to be starting to talk much more about the gut and the gut's influence on mental health. That's a fascinating area.
So this is a groundbreaking podcast, Ray. We're getting this message out there early.
I'm only learning about it and talking about it because of my own interest. This is the thing. But
it's great, the more I found out about it. Oh my gosh, I feel inspired to really start making some changes and looking at things. What do you think are some things people should avoid? Do you know? Like coffee or chocolate or processed foods or?
Processed foods for definite.
Like chips and biscuits and,
if you can,
lollies and stuff like that.
If you can avoid refined food. You need food that's grown as naturally as possible, ideally, or reared as naturally as possible. I mean, everybody knows that really, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't.
But it doesn't hurt to have a reminder because we live such busy lives that it's so easy to get takeaway or buy processed food or not go through the process of making stuff from the beginning. It's that culture of everything at your fingertips.
Yeah.
So I think that it doesn't hurt to remind people that going back to your meat and your vegetable and your fish and your fruit and your grains and your nuts and your fats, and we need saturated fats in our diet and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
It's good to remind people, and having a balance, like cutting out carbohydrates completely is not necessarily a great idea because you need them for energy and you need your 5 food groups.
I guess so. I mean, the whole field of nutrition is so complicated, isn't it?
It is.
Dietetics. I've got no idea in terms of what's right and what's wrong, really. I guess ultimately you have to go with what suits you. What this is talking about, this whole area of science, the paradigm shift is individualized medicine.
Right.
You know, so that's what functional doctors are into. Find out what you need as an individual. You know, there's no one size fits all when it comes to what's the ideal diet.
Yeah.
Because if I eat dairy, I'm sick. For other people, that might be a really good thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really good reminder as well. For sure. What are the practical steps that we can take to develop microbial diversity? We've kind of gone through most of that, haven't we? But is there anything else?
Yeah, actually, I would say don't be too much of a clean freak. Be a bit mucky.
Yeah, basically. Same as when you have kids, they say. Like when you've got a little kid, let them get on the floor, let them play with stuff.
Yeah.
People that keep their kids up and don't let them touch stuff and are really fanatical about germs, they can often end up with issues later on. And the kids that play in the dirt and mess about on the floor and you're not too worried about germs, fare better. There's some science that proves that, isn't it?
For sure. Those germs are important sometimes. Oh, and they also say there are microbes that pass through our body. They don't hang around, but they're actually really important for our health. So I've read about research where they've looked at populations of people who have hookworm more than other populations, and they're less likely to get autoimmune.
Why are you looking at that research? That's so weird.
That's what I do of a weekend. I'm really sad.
You are a psychologist.
I'm really sad. I just love learning about this stuff. I am.
Sorry,
I told you I was a psych geek. I told you I was a psych geek. So, actually, there's nothing I love more, and I don't get to do it very often, is just staying at home, staying in my dressing gown all day and just researching stuff. I absolutely love it.
Do you?
Yeah, God, I love it.
Okay, tell me about the hookworm people.
The hookworm people, people with infestations of hookworm, actually.
Is that like tapeworm?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Similar. I can't tell you about the hookworm in detail because I've never had it. I hope I never do, really. But it might mean that I wouldn't get autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes.
Why? Because they had it less, did they? The hookworm people?
Yeah, they have it a lot less, the hookworm people. Yeah.
Why? Because
I don't know why. It's just something to do with the microbes related to hookworm. They don't understand it. It might just be correlational. the suggestion is that there are certain bugs that we need in order to avoid certain conditions.
Do you have any thoughts or comments on meat eating?
No. I mean, I was vegetarian for 23 years. And then actually, because I had to give up a lot of different foods because I was having to restrict my diet for sensitivity, I ended up starting to eat meat again.
What impact did that have on you, do you think?
I didn't notice one impact one way or the other, to be honest.
Right.
I didn't really notice a big difference. I think it's more of an ethical thing nowadays, really. I think probably it's better if we don't eat meat. Red meat
for the
sure.
planet.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
How are our childhood memories relevant to the well-being of our gut, do you think?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I think there's a massive connection between childhood trauma and the development of a healthy nervous system. And gastric problems are really common amongst anxious children who've experienced adversity in childhood. Gastric problems are a common symptom. And there's one study by Tottenham and Callaghan from Columbia University. It's one of the first studies to suggest a link between adversity and biome change and neurological development in humans. So obviously, if the gut plays a really important part on the development of a robust nervous system, if you are in a traumatic situation, your nervous system is compromised because whenever you feel stress, your immunity in the acute sense is boosted. So the fight or flight response boosts your immunity. But chronic stress produces a chemical, a hormone called cortisol, and cortisol reduces your immunity. And that can lead to compromised gut health as well as compromised nervous system. And they don't fully understand that connection yet. But what they did in this study was they took a group of kids who'd experienced adversity in early life, which was parental separation. And there's a pile of evidence, this big to say that parental loss or separation has a profound impact on all sorts of health-related behaviors. So these kids had an increase in gastrointestinal symptoms. They had tummy problems. And they had different gut biomes to the children who were reared by their parents, very different. And then they also did brain scans. Obviously, scanning technology has its advantages and disadvantages. But they noticed that there was quite a profound difference in the circuitry, if you like, of an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And this is bigger in humans than any other species on the planet. And it's a really important communication station within our brain, essentially, for a whole range of different.
And they could see a difference in those kids.
The circuitry.
Wow.
They had different microbiomes and they'd experienced adversity. So, that's scratching the surface of hard evidence. It's one of the first studies on human children and that connection.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Okay, yeah, that is.
Yeah.
What do you know about the amygdala and how that might be linked to our gut?
Yeah, essentially, the amygdala is the emotion center in the brain. Obviously, the feel-good neurotransmitters are really important, serotonin, dopamine, and all sorts of other chemicals. And so, again, it's the role that the gut plays in helping to feed the nervous system. So there are chemicals like BDNF, which is what they call a brain fertilizer, and the gut helps to produce those sorts of chemicals. And the job of BDNF and other chemicals like them is to spring clean your nervous system, to spring clean the neurons and the synapses and keep them functioning. And if the gut isn't functioning properly, then you're likely not to produce the chemicals that you need to keep your nervous system healthy and well. So that would relate to any area of the brain.
What impact can dieting have then on our physical and mental health?
Depends what you mean by dieting, really.
Well, I guess restricting food.
You see, there's a lot of really...
Or cutting out certain foods.
Yeah, again, it would depend on the individual. I really wouldn't want to give advice about diet because I just think it's complicated science in itself and it's so diverse. But ultimately, there's a lot of good research around fasting. I think most of us probably eat too much. We eat poorly and we eat too much. Got all these examples of people who live to a very ripe old age and run marathons when they're 85, and they have 3 small meals a day, and function very well. So we probably overload our systems.
We've got this sort of culture of abundance, haven't we, where we just keep going and there's something in your brain that tells you when you're full, but it needs time to register, and we eat past that sometimes, don't we?
Yeah, for sure.
I certainly do that.
Yeah. The hormones in the blood that tell us to be full often get ignored.
Do you think there's any connection between menopausal hormones and overeating?
Not sure.
Yeah, me neither, but I think so.
Yeah, probably.
How can we be more conscious of what our gut is trying to tell us? How can we make more connections with what we really need, whether it be emotionally, physically, or mentally?
Yeah, I think it's really just being present, and the whole philosophy behind mindfulness and yoga, tuning into your internal landscape, looking at what's going on within your body, just taking a moment. So, for example, if you wake up feeling lousy, rather than thinking, oh, that was because I saw so-and-so and they pissed me off, or thinking, oh, God, I'm so stressed at work. What did I eat late last night? What did I fill my body with? Maybe I drank too much. Maybe I ate too much of the wrong food at the wrong time. Our diet will actually influence our emotional state. What we're putting inside our bodies contributes to our emotional health, not just in terms of things like substances like booze and drugs, but also the kind of crap you find in any processed food could have an impact on how you feel. And so Julia Anders on this TED talk talks about that. She says, just have a look, just be aware, think about your body, think about how you're feeling.
What about the impact of sleep on the way that we feel?
Oh, well, I'm a complete sleep junkie. If I don't get 8 hours a night, I'm hopeless.
I'm almost like high and excited and positive if I've slept well.
Yeah.
And then if I haven't slept well, I've got a short temper, I can't concentrate, I feel moody. Like sleep is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, really is. I think I had a sleepless night on Monday. 0 sleep, so unusual for me. So last night I was in bed by 7, slept for 10 hours. But the comparison, I thought this is quite interesting doing Jules' podcast because my gut was a mess after no sleep. So serotonin is the neurotransmitter that regulates the sleep-wake cycle. And again, serotonin is also implicated in conditions like mood disorders, such as depression. And a symptom of depression is lack of sleep. So there's this whole kind of cycle of connectivity, which we don't fully understand yet. But your gut can really pick up the slack and the strain if you don't get enough sleep. I think it's absolutely crucial for all sorts of important functions.
So important.
Memory as well, actually, laying down of memory.
I had another podcast with Kate Bridle, the sleep specialist. She came in and, it's absolutely brilliant. Randomly, I think it's like 89. I don't know why I think it's that number, but I think it's episode 89. It's called The Sleep Specialist.
I'll check it out.
And it is so interesting. You'll use it with your kids. I use it with my students.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's really good. There's a whole little section on there on the importance of sleep for teenagers and the importance of sleep for being good at school and succeeding in your exams and things like that. So,
and we're living in one of the most sleep-deprived societies in the world, aren't we here?
We are. I don't understand. I mean, it's a cultural thing but
there's
Chinese people don't seem to put their kids to bed.
No, I know.
It's
there's
weird.
Also
Why
the light
is that?
pollution,
Do you know?
the noise pollution, the fact that you've got loads of people living in 500 square foot, a lack of private space, lack of darkened rooms. But that kind of, eke out your day, make it as long as possible.
Yeah, and the whole thing about cramming, staying up and cramming and you'll do well in exams when scientifically it's proven that does not work.
Yeah.
It's a bad idea. And we've got to get that across to our kids because it's almost a cultural thing as well. Very, very interesting. How do you recommend that we successfully break our old habits if we realise that we've got to make some changes in our lives?
That's a toughie, isn't it?
I think mindfulness and yoga and doing things that are positive in your life are a big thing.
For sure.
Seeking counselling, life coaching, that kind of thing can really help.
Yeah, life coaching is great.
Having a mentor.
Yeah, for sure. And the problem is, habits are just repetition, aren't they? And the brain is a passive thing. It will just kind of do whatever we decide it needs to do. And so we just get into these repetitive behaviours. And then if you pair the repetitive behaviour with a reward, like drugs or drink or pornography, then what you've actually got is a behaviour that's likely to be repeated often and often. But some habits are pretty harmless. If I dump my bag and my coat on the floor in the middle of the living room every time I get home, it's not causing that great an amount of hassle to me or anybody else. But if people are drinking like 3 bottles of red wine a night, then it's an issue. And I guess habits become a problem when they start to impact on your health. So as you say, just notice for a start. I always think it's really interesting with a subject like alcohol and drugs. At what point do you recognize and decide that you are an addict? and this is getting beyond healthy. That's a really interesting idea. Noticing whether this is impacting not just on you, but on other people. Is it affecting your relationships, your bank balance, the quality of your parenting, whatever it might be?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I quit smoking about 7 years ago or whatever it was, I just stopped. I just made up my mind to stop, and I stopped. And it wasn't actually that hard because it was just about a mindset.
Yeah. You just decided it wasn't going to be hard?
I just decided it wasn't going to be hard, and I had to do it for my health or I was going to die of tongue cancer I had in my brain, especially because tongue and throat cancer has happened to both of my uncles.
Right, yeah.
And my tongue was feeling super weird. So it was like, okay, this is danger point, so I have to stop. So I just stopped.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it can be done.
It can be.
But then again, we're all individuals, aren't we? And for some people, these things are much more difficult than others.
For sure. And there is a biological reason for something like addiction. There's a guy called David Nutt, who's the neuroscientist who used to advise the government. He put together a list of the 20 most dangerous substances, and I think MDMA was 19th on the list. And I think at the top was cocaine, heroin, and this is all from memory, I think I'm right. Cigarettes were quite high as well, but MDMA was really low on the list.
Why?
Because the criteria that he used in terms of danger to individual, to society, to blah, 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 he decided that there were other drugs that were more dangerous than MDMA. And that was quite controversial. So I think he ended up not being the chief neuroscientific advisor on drugs to the government.
They got rid of him because of his list.
Yeah, right. But he's got a great name. He's called David Nutt. He's a neuroscientist. I love it. He actually was on the Russell Brand documentary. Russell made the documentary after Amy Winehouse's death because they were good friends.
I saw that.
Yeah,
yes.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, and he's done a lot of work brain scanning addicts' brains and discovering that actually they have much less impulse control because of their neurology, because of the way that their brain functions. So, if you're up against circuitry problems, that is an issue. But we know that this thing between our ears is neuroplastic. That means it's not something that's fixed. It changes throughout our life, and it can change in loads of miraculous ways. And I think in terms of my teaching, like giving that message, getting that message across to students, you can, if you decide to, you can change what's going on here. If you tell your brain for years and years and years, and if other people tell you that you're crap at maths, you're not going to do maths. If you change the story, it sounds really simplistic, but ultimately the science bears this out, that if you can actually change the story that you're feeding your brain, your nervous system, you can be your own healer. You can actually change. You can be like your own pharmacist, I always say to the kids. You can change your neuronal balances, your neurochemistry, which is really powerful stuff just by the stories that we tell ourselves and just by the way that we behave and interact with others. So it's really powerful. Lots of powerful truths in psych. It's very accessible now. I always think to myself, you've got this little square box that contains a Bodleian library of information.
Our laptops. Yeah. It's amazing,
isn't it?
You've got access
to all this incredible information. You can educate yourself. A lot of it's...
I think about when I was at school, there were no computers. It was the library and whatever books you had in the library, and that was it.
Yeah.
I feel like I would have been a lot better educated in this day and age with a laptop, so much better.
For sure.
I would have had so much more potential to be much brighter than I turned out. But I can still improve my brain.
Yeah,
Although
for sure,
menopause messes with your memory. And my brain is not functioning as well as it did. But I remember ringing my auntie and saying, oh my gosh, I can't remember anything. What's going on? And she's like, it will pass. It will get better. And so it's
Have you found that it has?
Yes, I'm finding it's definitely improving, and I have more control over my emotions. I'm much more rational. My memory is improving. I'm not repeating myself as much as I was. So, yeah, things are changing for the positive, but it was a 10-year purgatory in madness.
I hear you, Jules. I had exactly the same.
Yeah, it was really tough. And not that Brené Brown wants us to have comparative suffering. We shouldn't compare ourselves to others, but I do know there are many people that have a lot worse than I did. A lot worse. So some scientists out there need to do a bit more work on menopause
so
for
do.
all the
They
women out
so
there
do.
because it's just bloody traumatic for many of us.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of us, aren't there?
Yeah, I think every woman's going to go through it if they live to that age.
And everyone that they socialise with.
Yeah, you affect everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Stripping off in the middle of winter. People don't understand what's going on.
My own personal tropics.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we haven't covered in this amazing brain-gut chat that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that whole idea of habit change. There's that Mitchell study, the marshmallow study. Fascinating. So this guy got a group of kids and said, put the kid in a room, marshmallow on a plate, and said to them, if you eat this now, fine. But if you wait till I come back, you can get 2. And then they just videoed and watched how the kids responded. And it was all about delayed gratification, which kids could resist and which kids couldn't. And there's been replications of it. The videos are all over YouTube and it's really cute to watch, really funny. My students love seeing it. And then he did longitudinal research, which means he investigated those people throughout their lives as they grew into adults. And he found those kids who were able to say no to the first marshmallow and wait for the second one were much more, in inverted commas, successful in life. They did better in exams, their marriages lasted longer, they lived in bigger houses, they had better jobs. That's kind of suggesting that there's a big nature element to something like how able you are to break old patterns or to have willpower. Have you got the cognitive horsepower, if you like, required to resist something and to actually change your behavior?
So that's so
it will
interesting.
probably come much easier to some people than others. But the message now would be, look, we know that this stuff shifts around. We know the black box of the brain is malleable. I just feel that if from a very early age, kids are educated about the fact that they can change the way they think and that has positive benefits, that would give a lot of kids a real step up. A big important part of habit change or establishing good habits, because a lot of habits can be very positive, is getting support from others. Talk a lot about how important it is for young people to have an adult mentor other than their parents. I mean, I think about who was there for me when I was a teenager. It was the 70s, it was like 70s, 80s. Mum was really busy with 3 kids, one of whom was disabled. Dad was working all the hours and he was a 70s man, so he was in the pub quite a lot. I just got on with it. Oh, Ray's all right. She'll be fine.
I was the one looking after all the local kids.
Yeah.
I was the one in charge.
Yeah.
I really was.
Absolutely. You were the one mentoring them.
Yeah. And that's been reflected in the way that I operate in my life. I'm always mentoring and looking after other people and struggle to ask for help or support when I need it. And the other thing that's really interesting is when my sister and I got chocolate or got gifts or whatever, she was always able to hoard and hold and wait. And I was always in there and eating and finishing and getting into it straight away.
Yeah.
She's way more financially successful than me. Isn't that interesting? She's got a lot more money than me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there you go.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I wouldn't like
and
to
she's probably better
that...
at saving it than I am.
Yeah,
even if I get it, I'm probably, but I'm still not a spender, but it's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we could say she's necessarily more successful, but that depends on how you define success.
Exactly. Success is a relative concept,
isn't
it? Isn't it about having
she doesn't have a podcast.
Car and a big house.
She has 10 houses, but she doesn't have a podcast. She hasn't written a book. No.
There you go.
Sorry, Nikki, if you're listening.
No, it's great. This is really good fun. I'm enjoying it. Yeah, I suppose as well, like develop a substitute plan, like have a backup, the things that you enjoy, what could you have around you that you enjoy?
What do you mean? Can you explain in more detail?
I'm thinking really, really simple things like if you need to give up a particular food product.
Oh, yes. Like,
depending on your environment.
Well, they say that if you're going to quit alcohol, replace it with running.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like
exactly.
give up, substitute one addiction for another.
And then the whole idea of expectation theory. You learn to have this expectation that when you have those 5 vodkas on Friday night, life is going to be beautiful. It's Friday night, I'm going to have 5 vodkas. Everything will be wonderful. And you forget that the next morning you're going to feel absolutely awful.
See, now that's about thinking further about consequences, which teenagers often don't do because their brains aren't fully developed till they're 25.
That's right, yeah.
And then there's people like me. I'm a very good consequence thinker. And I don't do all these kind of behaviors where I regret. Like I don't really drink. I don't take drugs. I don't do anything really that is going to put me in that situation the next day, which is really interesting. And I'm even the person that will think about, right, if the ferry sinks, how am I going to get off and things like that. Do you know what I mean?
Like that is pragmatic.
Yeah. So I really plan survival things. When there's a typhoon, I can pack a complete survival bag ready and stuff like that.
That's very impressive, Jules.
Yeah, but it's not in an OCD way either.
The wind has to be blowing a little bit strongly for you to pack back.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting the different ways that people respond and how they think, and also thinking about consequences. And maybe those people who are more prone to addiction don't have that sort of longer thinking about the consequences of behaviour.
That's true. But nowadays, you're not alone. I mean, I just think that 1 year no beer thing on Facebook is absolutely fantastic. You sign up, you pay some money, and there's this huge support network out there. And people have got constant virtual support, and they all meet and run Spartan races together, and they're kind
another
of
joy
getting
of the
involved
internet
of accessing all that kind of healthy alternative and making yourself a new life and still having a life and still having social connections. That's the hardest thing about changing life habits. Quite often you have to give up social ties and responsibilities as well, which you might not want to.
Yeah, you do, for sure. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today.
That's all right, Jules. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you again, and super interesting. For my listeners out there, if you know anybody who'd love to hear Ray chat about the mind-gut connection and learn all about different tribes and feces and things like that, then please could you share it with your friends and family? And could you go to iTunes to rate and review us? That would be amazing. And now you can also go onto Patreon and search for Hong Kong Confidential. And I'm going to ask Ray 4 secret questions. She's going to choose 4 numbers from 1 to 50. I'm going to ask her 4 secret questions. And for as little as $1 a month, you can go onto Patreon, sign up to support Hong Kong Confidential and the production of it, and hear Ray's 4 questions. And actually, Ray is one of my 4 patrons. Thank you so much, Ray, for supporting me.
My pleasure. I love the podcast.
Yeah, it was amazing. I have to give you some gifts, which I forgot that they're home. I'm going to say goodbye to my regular listeners. Okay, thanks very much, Ray. It's been amazing.
Thanks, Jules.
You're welcome. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it? I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.